And just before the break, you indicated that you hadn't seen this letter before it was sent. We were just looking at a letter to you from the CBA of 22 March 1993 in relation to certificate of currency. Now that, just to remind you, was the date on which settlement of the matter was to take place. That is of the conveyance. So this letter on page 103 is sent a few days prior to settlement and seeks that Mr. Blewett send a bank cheque in the sum of $67,000. Now, I know you said you hadn't seen this letter. Do you recollect discussions with Mr. Blewett about that matter in the few days leading up to the 22nd?
About the certificate of currency or
No,
the need to pay the balance of the funds?
The need to pay the balance of the funds.
No, no discussions.
You had no discussions?
I had no discussions with Mr. Blewett about that matter.
You have discussions with Mr. Wilson about that matter?
No, I did not.
Because you'll see from this letter, it's said to be a copy of a letter dated 18 March 1993, which was sent to Mr. Blewett, but it's seeking either a bank cheque by the next day or that an amount be telegraphically transferred into a trust account by the next day. Was there, to your recollection, was there some flurry of activity about obtaining the funds for settlement?
Not insofar as I was aware.
Right. Can you come through to page 106 of the bundle? That's a bank cheque. Oh, I'm sorry, that's a cheque signed on the account of the AW Workplace Reform Association in the sum of money that had been requested in the letter we just looked at, $67,722.30. It's been drawn on the account of the association, as you can see. Did you have any discussion with Mr. Wilson or Mr. Blewett about that matter?
Certainly not.
Were you having any discussions with Mr. Wilson about what the association was doing at this stage,
No.
March 1993?
No.
He was contemplating standing for re-election, was he?
By 1993, Mr. Wilson had become branch secretary of the Victorian branch, and I don't recall the dates. They'd be transparent on the documents before the Commission, but I think discussions would have been in train about the creation of the National Construction Branch. So Mr. Wilson was certainly continuing to pursue his union career, but I don't recall there being elections that he was focused on that were imminent.
But over this time, this is a year or so after the association has been set up, you surely had some discussion with him about how the association was going or the like?
No, I did not.
Did you have any discussion about fundraising for whether he stood for an election or stood for some position in the NCB or otherwise?
No, he did not.
You never discussed that at all?
No, he did not.
All right, we'll come back to this letter on page 106. As we've seen, that's a cheque drawn from the account of the Workplace Reform Association, and it's drawn in favour of Slater and Gordon Trust account. Slater and Gordon maintained a trust account in WA, did it?
Oh, I don't know, Mr. Stolger. Slater and Gordon certainly had, an accounting section and a trust account, and there were record keeping for trust funds, and if you had a file that touched upon trust funds, then obviously there was the appropriate record keeping. But whether there were two accounts or one central trust account for the whole firm, I don't recall.
All right, so you don't recall whether it set up separate accounts in each state or whether there was some central account?
No. I mean, I, as a solicitor, had to, in terms of the file work, acquit the paperwork obligations in relation to the trust account, but I was not operating the trust account. There was an accounting section to do that. All
right. That sum of $67,000 was needed to procure the balance of the settlement monies to enable the settlement to proceed. If you come to page 123, capital A.
123, capital A?
Yes.
Yes.
Now, there's a notation, a handwritten notation, not enough money in trust. Do you recognise that handwriting?
No, I do not.
You'll see that it's an account ledger from Slater and Gordon, and it is in fact dated the 24th of March 1993, printed on that morning. There are some items under the heading date, reference and description, and they identify the source of particular funds that appear to have arrived in the Slater and Gordon trust account. So you'll see, for example, on the 15th of March 1993, there's an amount received on account of a valuation fee of $500. And then, it's a little hard to read, but on a date in March, it might be the 22nd of March 1993, there's an amount received said to be from a Mr. Ralph Blewett, balance of purchase monies, direct deposit, and it's $67,722.30. Now, I just took you to the cheque and it was drawn on the account of the association. Do you know why Slater and Gordon recorded in its trust account records that that money had been received from Mr. Blewett?
No idea, and I had no contact with this trust account record.
Who in the ordinary course of business maintained the trust account record at Slater and Gordon at that time?
Well, it was the trust account record was maintained in the accounting section.
Yes.
In terms of a conveyancing file, the operator of the file, Ms. Brosnahan, now Palmer, would have made arrangements, and the supervising partner was Nick Stipe-Brown.
When you say made arrangements...
would have obviously she's a conveyancing clerk, she'd regularly be dealing with monies in and out of trust. There would have been a system of forms and paperwork which she would have acquitted in relation to each file.
But are you able to shed any light on how the entry Mr. Ralph Blewett came to be on the account ledger rather than Workplace Reform Association?
Absolutely none.
And you don't recollect, or do you recollect, the individuals who were responsible for maintaining the account ledger for the trust account at that time?
I had no dealing with this account ledger, the one you are referring me to, no knowledge of it. I don't recall the names of the staff who worked in the accounting section. That may be ascertainable through Slater and Gordon.
All right, and then further down that page, there's an amount received from Slater and Gordon trust account, which was the mortgage loan in the amount of $150,000.
Yes.
And that was a loan that was organised through Slater and Gordon.
Yes, we discussed that earlier, the mortgage practice which was overseen by Jonathan Rothfield. I think we went to that before lunch.
Now, did Mr. Wilson ever suggest to you that the Kerr Street property was acquired for union purposes?
No, he did not.
Did he ever suggest to you it was being acquired by the association?
No, he did not.
When did you... I'll withdraw that. Now, the firm Slater and Gordon performed two legal tasks for Mr. Blewett, that is to say, conveyancing and in addition the provision of some financial planning advice.
Yes, that's correct.
I think you made reference to that in your evidence this morning.
Yes, in the discussion with Mr. Gordon and Mr. Shaw in 1995, it records me saying that when Ralph Blewett started talking about the purchase of property, that I referred him to Nick Stipe-Brown for financial planning advice.
Did he ask for that referral to be made?
Oh, I don't recall the words of the conversation, obviously. Out of the conversation, I thought he may seek such advice, and Nick Stipe-Brown was in a position to provide it, or financial planners working under Nick Stipe-Brown's oversight.
You have a definite recollection of Mr. Blewett asking for that, do you?
Well, my best recollection is the one informed by the September 1995 transcript.
Oh, I see. So you've reviewed that.
Yes, I've refreshed my memory, obviously, from looking at the transcript.
But you're not suggesting, as you sit here today, you have a recollection of a conversation with Mr. Blewett in which he requested that advice?
I don't have a direct memory of a conversation. What we do have is this record of a conversation in 1995 where I go to the matter.
Could you have a look at page 94 of the bundle behind tab 2?
94.
This is a letter of approval in respect of the loan application from from Slater and Gordon to Mr. Blewett, dated 10 March 1993. Refers to a procuration fee payable to Slater Gordon Financial Planning Pty Limited. Was that the entity which was giving the financial advice?
I see. The 0.5% payable. Yes, so there was a... That's right. There was a separate company within. So there was obviously the legal firm. There was a company trading as Slater and Gordon, which provided the financial planning advice.
This letter is, the acceptance of the terms of the letter has been placed upon the letter by Mr. Wilson, exercising the power of attorney. If you have a look at page 96. Now, the position is that Mr. Wilson was executing all relevant documents in relation to the conveyance pursuant to that power of attorney.
If that's what the file shows, Mr. Stolger, I had no...
But that was your...
I wasn't dealing with the conveyancing file. I wasn't dealing day to day with these documents. I wouldn't have cited these documents at the time. Obviously, sitting here now with the document in front of me, it's clear Mr. Wilson signed it, but that wouldn't have been known to me at the time.
Well, you certainly had some dealings with the conveyancing
yes,
file.
Yes, but not with the document you're referring to me now.
And you were still in a relationship with Mr. Wilson at that time?
Yes, I was.
And you must have been having some discussions with Mr. Wilson about these matters?
As I've indicated to you, I had discussions with Mr. Blewett and Mr. Wilson, with Mr. Blewett indicating that he wanted to purchase an investment property, and then the property was bought. We've been through the limited number of occasions that I did anything in relation to the conveyancing file. Didn't operate the conveyancing file, and it was not in my possession.
All right. Well, I just want to talk further a little bit about the financial planning. On page 110 of the bundle.
110?
Yes. There's a disbursement order which deals, among other things, with the procuration fee to which I've already made reference.
Yes, I have it.
Did you see this document when it was, or about the time it was created?
No, I did not.
Did Ms. Brosnahan have any discussion with you about whether or not to write off the procuration fee?
Not that I recall, no.
You were the person to whom she would have raised that, or with whom she would have raised that matter, correct? Yes. If she thought it was a relevant issue to raise, she would have raised it with me, that's true. Well, she raised with you the question of writing off other fees and disbursements in relation to conveyance, correct?
That's correct.
And it's quite likely she would have raised whether or not to write off the procuration fee, is that right?
If she wanted advice or instructions about writing off this fee, yes, she would have asked me.
Could you come back to page 88? You'll just have to look at it on the side, but it seems to be a note. It's drawn from the Slater and Gordon conveyancing file, but it's a note about the financial planning matter. I won't take you through the whole document, but towards the bottom it says, this may be Ms. Brosnahan's writing, I'm not certain, attending Mr. Wilson re above, 4th of the 3rd 93, he will, I think it says, let me have proof of income by fax, then original, and I think it says, and also let me have cheque for $500. $500 is presumably the valuation fee. Now,
Just admiring your sterling decoding job.
thank you. Mr. Wilson seemed to be personally involved in the provision of information in respect of the financial planning matter. Did he have any discussion with you about that?
No, he did not.
Were you involved in any way in the provision of the financial planning advice as distinct from the conveyancing matter?
No.
Now there's information was then provided beginning on page 89 concerning Mr. Blewett's income position. Do you know whether any information was received concerning any other sources of income that Mr. Blewett might have at that time?
No, I knew nothing about it at that time.
All right, and you don't know whether any detail of his wife's income or asset position was obtained?
No, I had no knowledge then, and I've got no knowledge now.
And likewise, I take it from your last answer that you don't have any information as to whether there was any detail of Mr. Blewett's asset position obtained for the purposes of financial planning?
No idea, no. I had no connection with the matter.
You knew at the time that he was borrowing in the order of $150,000 through the Slater and Gordon mortgage, Mr. Rothfeld's mortgage?
I knew it was Ralph Blewett's intention to have a mortgage for the balance above the deposit. I wouldn't necessarily have been able to rattle off the figures. I'm not sure I was familiar with the figures.
Well, you knew there was a shortfall between the amount that was being provided pursuant to the Slater and Gordon mortgage and the balance required to effect settlement.
I'm not sure what you mean about shortfall. You mean over and above the deposit?
No. He paid the deposit in the first instance, and then he borrowed $150,000, and then that still left an amount of a bit over $67,000, which was the shortfall between the amount Slater and Gordon were apparently prepared to advance and what was required to effect settlement. Now, you may not have known the specific details, but you knew there was a shortfall between what was being advanced under the mortgage and the amount required to effect settlement?
No, I did not.
You didn't know that?
No, I did not.
Did you make any inquiry of Mr. Wilson or Mr. Blewett as to where he had procured funds to pay the deposit?
No, my understanding, as we discussed, I think, before lunch, was, and in accordance with the discussion I had in 1995 with Peter Gordon and Jeff Shaw, my understanding was that Mr. Blewett wanted to purchase an investment property that he had from his own funds, his family funds, so his and his wife's funds, the ability to pay a deposit. He was looking to have a mortgage and have the investment and also the tax benefit consequential on the negative gearing.
Can I ask you to come to page 147 of the interview?